like what that really means. Okay, here we go. We're live. I'm starting to recognize patterns in my own behavior, and every time we go live, I see the button light up, and I go live. So it's almost as predictable as when I sing in the car, and my signature move is this.
Well, it's exciting. It's just always exciting. That's all.
We're live. It is exciting. I'm so glad you think so. That's amazing. So we'll give everyone a chance to come on in. I always say, like, warm up the pipes of the internet, make sure our content is flowing. So we've got 3 destinations going right now. I love simulcasting. So YouTube, the AutoCrit channel on YouTube, the AutoCrit author community, and our special group, Nanowrimo with AutoCrit, that is really focused on folks who have committed to the challenge of Nanowrimo. But we wanted everybody to be able to take advantage of our time today with Ally Machate. So if you're joining us from any of those channels, just a quick hey, oh, hey, Salissa, hey, Anya. So we've got people coming in from YouTube for sure. Just let us know as you're joining who you are, where you're from, and we will see you come through on my side. And we will have, hey, Western Mass, and I know, yep, Salissa in Hawaii. I always get so jealous, but I have to say it's a gorgeous day here in Georgia in the U.S. And where are you?
I'm just out. I'm like between Baltimore and Annapolis. I moved just a couple months ago, so I'm still in Maryland, but I moved a little further. We now live on. There are a lot of creeks and rivers in Maryland, so yeah. So I've got a little place on the Magathie River right now.
Oh, great! Next writer retreat, I vote. Ally's Riverside Retreat. That would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
It would be amazing. It would be amazing. It's beautiful.
As soon as we can all be around other humans again.
There's that, of course, yes.
Oh boy, am I so ready for that. Just to be around them. We spoke with an author the other day. I think it was Jennifer S. Brown. I said, I don't necessarily want to interact with a lot of people, but I really do want to be near, just in proximity. I want to go sit at Starbucks or a cafe and work and write and do the things. And she said, I just wrote an article about that. She sent me the link this morning, and it's hysterical. How to co-work with me at this coffee shop by an author, a writer. And it's like, do not sit down with me. Don't like, and I'm like, I agree with 100% of those points. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a thing. There's a whole etiquette to, working in a coffee shop, and it's funny. It's strange, isn't it? Like, people see you working on something, and then they want to know what it is, and they come over and what you're doing. And they ask all these questions. It's funny. It's funny.
Even with the noise canceling headphones on, yes, and I used to kind of get frustrated with that, but now I'm like, I just want to be somewhere. It's like the Little Mermaid. I want to be where the people are.
No kidding. No kidding. I think you are not alone in that these days, for sure.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we are good to go on all channels. Yay! Hi. Oh, Spartanburg County, South Carolina, Ontario. We're so worldwide. Pete's here from England. I hope Earl's able to join us from South Africa. He's always fun. But let's jump in. Hi, everybody. Beth from AutoCrit. And I have with us today expert publishing consultant and best-selling author, Ally Machate, founder of The Writer's Ally. And I just want to open it up. Ally, tell us a little bit more about you. And in particular, what does it mean to be a publishing consultant?
Yeah, absolutely. So publishing consultant is, I'll call it a little bit of an umbrella term, because there are so many different things really that publishing professionals do, and certainly that I do. So this, maybe it's just easiest to give you a really brief recap of my background that will help it make more sense. So I am one of those super annoying people who graduated college and got their dream job.
Wait, what was it?
Simon & Schuster. I got hired to work at Simon & Schuster in New York, Big 5 book publishing. And I kid you not, it's a true story. My mother will swear to it. When I was very, very small and people would ask me what I wanted to do when I grew up. It was either some combination of I wanted to be a writer and a lawyer, because, we can do everything when you're a kid. And the other answer, as I got a little bit older, was that I wanted to be an editor at Simon & Schuster. And
Wow.
I swear, and I haven't the faintest idea how I learned about publishing companies as a child. I don't know how that got in my head, but I knew I wanted to help make books and work with writers, and sure enough, I did. So I worked at Simon & Schuster and acquired books and edited books there for a number of years, all different kinds of books. And as the economy shrunk a little bit, we had the dot-com bust and then 9/11. And like many other industries in New York City, publishing shrunk quite a bit. And we went through a lot of layoffs. And I still had my job, but the industry had changed a lot, and there were very few opportunities to move up. I was still, sort of young junior editor type. And I ended up making the decision to leave. At first, I thought it would be temporary. I was almost done with a master's degree in English and creative writing. And I thought, you know what, I'll knock that out. I'll do a little freelancing. And then when I come back, maybe in a year, the economy will be moving better and there'll be more jobs and, things will be happening. And I just loved it so much, I never went back. So
wonderful.
Yeah. So over the years, I've done developmental editing. I moved into book doctoring and ghostwriting. And a lot of writing as well, just, all different kinds of content helping with books. And as self-publishing became more and more of a thing, I found myself also consulting with a lot of authors on how to build their platforms and how to make the right choices about whether they wanted to be an independent author or go the traditional route, so to speak. So all of those things, we use this term publishing consultant now that I've done all of this stuff. And basically, it means that I am an expert in book publishing and that I use that knowledge to help authors make decisions about how to publish their books. And of course, I lead a team at the Writers Ally of book publishing professionals, editors, designers, etc., to help execute on some of those plans.
That is wonderful. And I know that we have a crowd today that is incredibly interested in everything that you have to offer around publishing, how to get published, how to find a publisher, etc. Especially our audience from NaNoWriMo. But what we're going to talk about today, especially for that audience of our rhinos, rhinoceroses, maybe, oh, I love it. So is editing. So as we come down to the final week and a half of NaNoWriMo, we've been hosting tons of writing with the AutoCrit team and really pushing it and supporting people to hit that 50,000 word count. And as much as it pained me to say, I've said more often this month than ever before in my life, don't think about editing right now. As an AutoCritter, it hurts me to say that. But it's true. Getting those words out is the most important thing during NaNoWriMo. You cannot edit an empty page. I know we've all heard that. But we now are approaching the time where we want to maybe rest ourselves, rest our novels, and then start editing. So would love to hear your thoughts on what's next. Like you wrote the end on your 50,000th word. Those last two were 50,002.
Well, the end counts. Remember, everything counts in Nano.
And it's, you get to the end, it's like the absolute, I mean it this time, end of all endings. So help me God. Amen. Yes. And they're like 50,000. I love it.
Yep, exactly.
So, I'm here for it. Mm-hmm. So when you finish that, what do you recommend as kind of those very next steps besides celebrate, which I know we're going to do? So
yeah, I mean, celebrate for sure. I'm a big fan of NaNoWriMo. I haven't done it in the last few years, but I have participated. I've won once. I've, actually
That's
made
amazing.
it all the way through once. But I've done it a few times, and it's just a wonderful, exhilarating, crazy mess of a month. So congratulations to all of you who are almost there. Hang in there. You're almost done. And when you do finish, when Nano is over, the very first thing that I recommend that writers do, and this is true of any kind of writing project, but it's especially true of Nano because there is so much pressure to turn those words out and just, get it on the page all month long, is actually to stop writing, like put it away stop, take a break, get a refresher. There's no real magic number. I think that over time you experiment with what's best for you, but I recommend starting, at least try for a week, a whole week. Don't look at it. Don't talk about it. Try not to think about it. Like, really give yourself a rest and a break from whatever you were working on. And the reason is very simple. It has to do with the way that our brains work. It's very, very difficult for the human brain to be truly objective about something it has produced.
That might be the biggest understatement that I have ever heard. And I'm glad you're able to so succinctly identify that, because I think we all feel it in such a deep way. And it's human nature. It is your
Absolutely.
brain. And the biggest challenge is helping your brain get over that. So,
Yep.
Thank you for that.
Yes, that is absolutely true. I mean, and we all see it in big and small ways, right? Like, if you've ever written an email to someone and read it 5 times and then sent it off and it comes back and then you catch that really egregious typo or that word that you missed, right? That's what I'm talking about. Your brain is actually designed to help you understand yourself. So when you write something and you're looking at it, your brain fills in the gaps. It sees what you meant to say and not necessarily what you actually said. So apply that to 50,000 plus words. And, we're not just talking about missing a comma or using the wrong word. We're talking about, I deleted an entire scene and that character is still here, right? Or, I had this great idea in the second week of Nano and I started writing in this direction and then I changed my mind, but and then I wrote in this other direction, but all this stuff is still like going nowhere, right? So
have you read my draft? I feel like it's like
no secrets. But yeah, so you really just need to give your brain a break. You need to try as much as possible to give yourself the opportunity to have some objectivity. And the only way to do that is to get some distance. So, put it away, give yourself a full week at least before you dive back in. I promise you will be shocked at the things that you see when you go back to your draft. And that is the second step, of course. So you've given yourself a break. Now you're ready to start revising. What the hell do you do? And the very first thing that I recommend people do, and I know that this is very, very difficult, but I invite you to take off your writer hat and put on your editor hat and try to, sort of shift mentalities. When you go through this draft now for the first time, after you've finished, after you've had that break, try to read it all the way through as if it wasn't yours. And just assess it, right? So this is not about fixing all the little things, and especially again for Nano, there's going to be lots of them because speed is the key, not, punctuation. So just read it through. However that works for you. If you like to use, if you like to read on the screen and use track changes to make comments, if you prefer to print it out and handwrite it, doesn't matter. Any method that works well for you. But read it all the way through and just make notes. Make notes about the parts that you really like. You're going to find some parts in there where you're like, oh, I wrote that? That was awesome.
I'm a genius. Yes.
Yeah, I'm a genius. Where did that sentence come from? You will find those pieces, highlight those, celebrate those. I loved this bit. I loved that part. This character turned out to be really great. I love this character. This moment is so authentic, whatever it is. And note the parts that don't make sense. Note the parts where you're like, I thought that I was going to write a thriller, so I started writing in this direction. And then I decided it was really a romance and this is not going to make sense anymore. Highlight the bits that don't make sense. Highlight the things that you need to go back and fix. Make notes about new ideas. As you read through it, you're going to start to formulate probably new ideas about where the story can be refined or how things can be fixed. Note those as well. But don't actually go ahead and make the changes. Just note things. Just pay attention to what you have and try to get a sense of where you're at and where you want to go. And this is the time where you really want to be serious about what kind of book you've written and what kind of book you wanted to write. Because sometimes, and again, Nano especially, but all the time, really, writers sit down. You might be inspired by a scene or a moment or an idea, and you might think that you're writing one kind of book. But as you write and inspiration hits and the muse takes over, you might end up going in a totally different direction. So, if that happened to you, if you started off thinking you were going to write one type of book and it ended up really being something else, now's your opportunity to decide. Do you like where it went? Are you going to stick with that? Or did you really want to do the thing you set out to do, and maybe we need to pull it back in that direction? So think about that. Make those decisions now, about what this book is actually going to be, in terms of genre, in terms of tone, those kinds of things, and make that all a part of your notes. And then once you have all of that together, you can get a really good sense now of what kind of plan, what kind of revision plan you're going to need. And then
making all the notes over here. So like, wow, that's a good one. Oh, so yes, keep going. Now sometimes, and tell me if I'm doing a spoiler like I do, you sometimes recommend, even for pantsers, especially for pantsers, maybe making an outline after the fact. Am I skipping ahead? Am I stealing your thunder?
No, you're perfectly on time. That's the very next step. Absolutely. Well done. Yeah, so you have this plan, what book you want to write or what book you were trying to write. You can see sort of at a big picture level what has to happen, if there are scenes to change, scenes that are missing that need to happen. If you realize, you wrote this whole book and there's no climax, right? That can happen, right? You just kind of wrote a bunch of scenes and it's interesting, right? But maybe it doesn't actually go anywhere yet. Whatever those things are. Now you can see them. So now it's time to look back, and I like to think of drafts in terms of stages. So what I would call this material, this first stab, whether it's nano or not, I consider that raw material. It's not even really a draft yet, right? This was just the process of getting all your ideas on the page. So now it's time to take that raw material and turn it into what I would call a real rough draft. And to do that, we have to bring a sense of cohesion to the raw material. So I like to think of it also as, we'll use structural metaphors. You can think of it as a skeleton. You can think of it as, a blueprint for a house, whatever works best for you. But the idea is any kind of story, any kind of narrative has that structure, that inherent structure. So now it's time to get clear about what that structure needs to be and how the pieces of your raw material get hung on that structure. And that's what the outline is. The outline is the best tool to date that I know of to actually get a clear picture of what that skeleton or that, frame or blueprint looks like. So if you didn't have an outline before, and even if you did, if you had an outline before, now is the time to look at it and compare it to what you wrote and make adjustments, right? Where did you stray from the outline? Is it a good kind of stray? Is this something you want to add to the outline, or is it something you need to trim back on? What needs to happen to the outline to better fit what you've written, and vice versa? If you never had an outline's an awesome revision tool because that gives you that map, that roadmap. So now you write the outline based on the story that you've written. What happens along the course of your plot? What does the character development look like? What are the, how do the themes unfold? Where does the climax happen? How does it get wrapped up? All of those bits and pieces create an outline. And it can be messy. It doesn't have to be like Roman numerals and letters and like what you learned in 8th grade, right? I mean, it can be, if that works for you, that's cool. But really, we're just talking about mapping out the beats, right? The patterns of conflict and tension, the cause and effect, the things that happen in the story. That's your outline. So if you didn't have one, make one now to reflect what you've written. And as you do it, in accordance with the notes that you've made, what usually starts to happen is you start to see those places that are missing or that aren't sufficiently connected to the rest of the story. Like, you may have written a really awesome scene and then realized it doesn't seem to have anything to do with what was happening, right? But maybe you want to keep it, so you have to figure out, okay, if here's the to use a skeleton metaphor, right? Here's the hand. The hand is over here, but it needs to be connected to the body by an arm. So use your outline to figure out what that arm is going to be and what it's going to look like. Make those connections. And when you spend time working on an outline in this way, you have a very clear structure, as I mentioned. So now you can go back to the raw material, and some of it may already be in shape, and good on you if that's the case. But if it's not, don't worry. You start to use that framework, use that skeleton to show you where the raw material goes, how to bring it all together, and again, really to see what's missing, what needs to be added to beat the metaphor to death, to flesh it out fully.
Literally, just like put some meat on those bones.
That's right.
Thigh bone connected to the shin bone connected to the foot bone. Feel free to sing that if you find that helpful. Sing along.
Absolutely.
As you are starting to make your outline. That's wonderful. I love this idea of taking those raw materials and it kind of like laying them out in front of you, and you have then that diagram, the blueprint, the ever so general directions that perhaps come with your IKEA bookcase, and then you start to put those pieces together. The thing about the scene that you wrote that was so lovely, and you really want to connect it, I think there's an opportunity to, build an arm bone and this one and connect it to the skeleton. There's also perhaps a chance to like put that in your, I don't want to say file cabinet, but you don't have to force it into your book.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If it doesn't really work. So considering the outline and the type of book and the genre and the feel, the emotional tone, when you look at your Power Words report and AutoCrit, for example, if you were trying to write a romance and it comes off all fear, maybe you have like a thriller or something different. But, giving into the idea that you wrote this gorgeous scene, maybe that's for a different book. You don't have to kill your darling, but you can maybe put your darling over here instead of building, a third arm that, again, to beat that metaphor to death, which is so fun. Like how many arms does a person have?
Well, no, I mean, that's actually, that works really well because you don't want 3 arms, you want 2 arms, right? So, the numbers don't translate perfectly. We're not saying you can only have 2 subplots, right? You might have more than 2 subplots. But the point is, every book has its structure, and then that structure gets modified slightly depending on the genre. Romance, you brought up, romance is a great example. If your supposed romance novel doesn't have, 2 love interests, protagonists, whatever sex or gender they are, you need some, or maybe it's more than 2. I mean, there are, romance novels that are more poly these days. Whatever it is, there's a romance between certain number of people, and those certain number of people end up together at the end. Bare minimum, you must have those elements. If it doesn't, it's not a romance novel. Ooh. And that's what's really important to understand. That's where the skeleton comes in, right? A romance novel, by definition, has those elements. Now, there are many types of books that have romantic elements, or where there are characters involved in a romance. But, if one of them is dead by the end of the book, you didn't write a romance novel. You wrote something else.
That would be if my guy Gareth wrote romance novels. 100%. He's like, this is so romantic. Everyone is dead. I don't understand. Love it. He's a horror writer, so absolutely there would be some death there. But okay, good to know that. And we have some fun interviews coming up around Christmas around romance with a romance author. She's going to talk about Christmas romances. So yeah. Oh, okay. It makes sense. Having your characters that are trying to be together or who are overcoming obstacles to be together end up together is what makes it a romance.
Yeah. And not every genre is as clear cut. Romance is one, mystery thriller is another, right? You're, some at the beginning of a whodunit, somebody's dead, right? Or it might be a cozy, maybe something's gone missing, something's been stolen, or there's some mystery. It gets introduced at the beginning. Eventually, it gets resolved at the end. There's certain things that have to happen to make those books work. And that's probably, a good time to point out that if you are brand new to writing, if this is like the first time you've ever written anything and you did Nano and, your friend talked you into it and you went along, you did it. Now you've got this book and you're like, what do I do with it now? In addition to working on that structure from an inherent point of view, just looking at what you have and what you want to say, you should also educate yourself a little bit about the kind of book. that you want to write. So if you indeed feel like, well, I wanted to write a romance, or I wanted to write a mystery, or I wanted to write a literary novel, whatever it is you wanted to write, if you aren't very familiar with what the skeleton of those kinds of books should look like, now's the time to get that education. And there are tons of how-to books on any kind of, type of book you want to write. You'll be able to find some of that information. You'll find some of it online for free with bloggers. AutoCrit has a ton of information. A ton of information is part of the various membership tiers that you can access that give you, I think I just saw an email recently. You guys are launching a bunch of new complete courses, even for
Oh
writing
my
like
gosh.
horror stories
Yeah.
and fantasy and all kinds of cool stuff. So, this is where the education comes in. Know what kind of book you're trying to write. Make sure that the skeleton that you're building is appropriate for the kind of book you're trying to write.
You should have like a T-Rex skeleton when you're trying to build a human, and that would not be.
That's right.
Oh, this metaphor can go on forever.
Forever.
I love it. Yay. Oh, that's wonderful. So we'll be posting some additional resources kind of in our communities around how to learn about the specific skeletons. Whew, this sounds like a lot of work. So we're resting, which is so far my favorite step. I want to ask, on that 1 week break, minimum of 1 week, to not, you said not write, but I'm thinking, don't look at the manuscript that you just finished. Short stories, just to keep the juices.
Oh yeah. Oh, work on anything else. Yeah.
Do any other type of writing, just not that piece of work. Because I feel like, I don't know if we would have a lot of success telling people not to write, because it's such, especially at the end of Nano, it has become such an ingrained part of our being and such a habit that we've worked so hard to develop. Write some short stories. Ooh, great time to do a Destination Unknown challenge in our group, or pick up a genre that you've never written before. Try something a little bit different. I love that.
That could be fun. Yeah, anything. Yeah, sorry, to be clear, absolutely. You don't have to stop writing. Just don't work on that particular project.
Just don't, and get your mind, it's like a palate cleanser, right? Step away from it for a while. Do the full read through as if it's not your work. Make those notes, good and bad. Thank you for pointing out to note the good things, because so often we look at it with such a critical eye. Highlighting the scenes or words or phrases or character revelations that you love about what you've written is so important, because you have done a lot of amazing work. Give yourself some kudos, just like the celebration at the end of Nano or at the end of finishing a manuscript. Go back and reread some of those special parts that you've created that are, these are like diamonds. These are really incredibly well-written phrases or whatever it is. Give yourself a little pat on the back. I like that. Maybe highlight it in a different color. Like, this is a good one. Everything that is pink. Everything that's, needs some work is, yellow or blue or whatever. Red makes me anxious. But despite the red in the AutoCrit logo, I don't like to edit in red because it's just too violent. Gareth writes in red and edits in a more dark red, and so I love how diverse our team is. So we've made the outline. We're comparing that outline to the work. Make sure all the pieces connect, and making sure, just confirming that we've written what we intended to written, or what we now want to write, and that things are connected and holistic for the genre or type of book that you're trying to write, or that you intend to write, regardless of what you actually wrote. Romance, they get together. Thriller, somebody's probably dead. Horror, definite death and blood and guts and gore. So, and suspense and tension. So far, so good. Whew. So does that take us to our first draft? So we've gone from pile of words, just raw materials. Is this our first draft?
This is our rough draft.
Rough draft. Okay.
Yes. So the first, what ends up becoming your first fully completed and cohesive draft is a rough draft. And that's an important distinction from the raw material, right? Because when you're just getting things on the page, dead ends, scenes that go nowhere, ideas that didn't pan out, all of that characters that you're not going to actually use. All of that happens a lot in the raw material. So when the rough draft comes together, it doesn't mean that there's no more work. Of course, there's still going to be refining and polishing and improving. But what it means is you now have a bulk of material that generally flows well from start to finish in something resembling a book. That's your rough draft.
Fantastic. What comes next? So is it rough draft and second draft? What do we look out for that very next giant phase?
So for me, I like to consider the process of going from a rough draft to a true first draft to be the start of the revision period. So you'll notice I was talking a lot about different activities, and none of them were actually about revising, right? We haven't even talked about revising yet.
Anything at this point, right? This is still just organizing the pieces that I have laid out in front of me. Okay.
Exactly.
I haven't removed my first adverb yet.
That's right. So now it's time to start revising. So you have your outline, you have your plan. You should be able to see at this point roughly what needs to happen to your draft on a big level. So again, we're talking about scene level, character level, not just minor line level stuff. We're talking about big picture items that are going to be really critical to making sure that your story makes sense, right? Flows logically, is engaging, and of course has the impact and tells the story, creates the response in your reader, the mood in your reader that you're aiming for. So now's the time to start executing on that. Armed with your outline and your plan, any notes that you made as you went through the draft, your knowledge, hopefully now at this point, of what your kind of book requires and is expected by your future readers, you can now start to go in and start to do the revising. So write the scenes that are missing, cut the things that don't belong, combine the two characters that you've decided should now be one character. All of those things that need to happen. Now is the time to go in and start filling that out. Start to hang those things on the skeleton so that you have a complete, right? The shape, the cohesive, complete body. When you look at a skeleton with some meat on it, that's a person. When you look at a draft where all the raw material has been hung on appropriately and the pieces filled in, that's a book. It might be a rough book, but it's still a book. And that's how you start getting from that rough draft to your complete first draft, which starts to really deal with those gaping holes, the things that don't make sense, the things that aren't quite working or aren't quite logical, all that stuff.
Is this where you're looking at overall story arcs? Is this what we would consider kind of developmental editing, to look for plot holes, which just no. What is it if you only have a plot hole? That's just, there's no book. That's just like that when the story's not moving forward. So yeah, the developmental, the story arc, mentioned the character arcs, combining characters. Maybe you have a multitude of characters that are not as three-dimensional, and you read through and you decide they don't really need to be separate characters. Blend them and make them into one. That's totally fine. If you need someone else in there, you could probably, if you only have two characters and you need a third one to stir up some drama, now would be a great time to introduce someone who's going to stir the pot in your book and raise that conflict that your hero has to overcome, or that challenge they have to overcome.
Right. And a good, if you're new, if you've been, just starting off on this writer journey and you don't have a lot of experience, one way that you can start to, get an emotional sense of, have I gotten to the first draft state yet, right? Have I gone from rough draft into a true first draft state, is as you approach something that you feel like you could be comfortable showing someone and that you would get useful feedback from it, right? So imagine the difference between sending somebody the earlier versions, maybe what you have on November 30th versus, what you might have after that first round of pulling the raw material together, where you have lots of questions. If you still have lots of questions, you don't want to be giving it to someone else to read, right? Like you need to at least know that all of the big stuff has been taken care of, that it's generally again, looking like a book. It's generally pulling together into something cohesive. When you start to feel like you're at that point, that's a good sign that you've basically hit that first draft stage, and now you can really dig into starting to refine it. This is where we can start to get other readers. And I want to, this is a small thing to some people, but this is one of those places, forgive me, I'll get up on my soapbox for just a moment. I find that a lot of readers, or a lot of writers rather, they misuse the terms beta reader and alpha reader.
Oh.
And I think
Alpha reader is so undervalued, and you rarely hear about that. And I think I'm going to just listen to what you have to say, because I feel like we're on the same vibe here. Yeah.
So first of all, the whole concept of alpha and beta testing comes from software development, right? This isn't something that's inherent to the writing process. This has been a modern adaptation. We've sort of taken this idea. And the idea is that when you launch a new product, you have different levels of people testing it out for you. And it's really important to understand the difference, because the kinds of people that you have for your alpha readers, which is of course the first round, is very different from the reason why you have beta readers. They're very different types of people. Your alpha readers are technical level writers. So if you are in a critique group, or if you've ever thought maybe of joining a critique group or a writers group, that's what we're talking about. Those are your alpha readers. Even one writing partner, a friend that you did Nano with, and now you...
Oh no, looks like we're getting a little bit of a choppy connection with
That's
Ally.
cool. Who is a little bit in the know. Oh, am I back? Am I better?
You are. You went a little Max Headroom. Thank you, everyone, for understanding who Max Headroom is. But yes, okay. I think you're good now. Thank you. Oh no, I spoke too soon. I should never. Okay.
So your alpha readers are people who have some understanding of what it is you're doing. That's why other writers make the best alpha readers.
Oh my goodness, this is getting worse.
People who can talk to you on, if it were a car, these would be your fellow mechanics or car enthusiasts. Yes. Am I getting really bad?
It is getting a little worse. So let's try just, can you, in the bottom of your StreamYard screen, can you stop the camera? Maybe let's not feed your video through, and see if we can at least keep your audio connected, because this is such important content. Uh-oh. Let's see if I can. We may have lost her. My goodness. I'm gonna, while Ally is maybe getting reconnected. Eek! Yeah, eek is right. While Ally's getting reconnected and we're reestablishing contact with her, I'm going to just fill in where she was headed with alpha readers versus beta readers. And it started to get pretty choppy. So, oh, there she went. Oh, goodness. This is a wider screen. Alpha readers, when you think about it, are the alpha, obviously, in the Greek alphabet. The very first, these are the very first people that will read your manuscript as a book through start to finish, aside from yourself, possibly your partner. Thinking of how you want to leverage them, it makes a ton of sense to get people who are informed about at least the fundamentals of, right? Tech companies don't like us using this. We're going to go for it. Fundamentals of a novel, the structure, the idea that you need to have a protagonist and antagonist, the idea that you should maybe have conflict to resolve, the idea that you need to keep the story moving forward, ideas around pacing, etc. Really broad strokes around the developmental part. Those are your alpha readers. They're tremendously helpful. You find them in your reader groups, other authors, as Ally mentioned. maybe some of your nano buddies that you went through NaNoWriMo with, because they're in the same boat that you are, and they know how to give you that technical, tactical feedback around what to look for at that very early stage. Beta readers, and let me see if I can pull Ally back in. Beta readers are going to be the next phase. They're phase 2. And I'm going to pull Ally back in and let her take it. I just walked the team through a little more information around an alpha reader, where you get the technical feedback from other authors, people in your writing groups, perhaps. Beta readers are a little bit of a different breed, and what you get from them, what you expect from them, is a little bit different as well. So I'm going to hand it back over to Ally. Oh, please tell me you're just being very still.
I'm here. I turned off the camera just in case it was interfering. I'm not really sure what's going on.
Oh, no worries.
Apologies, everybody. So yeah, Beth, that was a perfect summary of the alpha reader. And yes, absolutely. The beta, they're different. Whereas the alpha readers are people who understand writing and how to talk to you about conflict and tension, and how to make sure your antagonist is appropriately conflicted.
Oh goodness, Ally, we're losing you again.
Readers should be people who actually represent your target readers.
Your beta readers should be. We lost your audio there for just a moment.
That's right. Your beta readers should be people who represent your target readers. So but if you're writing a YA novel for 14 to 16-year-old girls, it would be amazing if you could get a bunch of 14 to 16-year-old girls to read the book and let you know what they think. And all they're telling you is, where are they confused? Where are they really excited and engaged? Where is the story losing them? Where do they feel like they're bored? Where do they feel like they don't care about the character anymore?
Oh my goodness, we keep losing.
That's the kind of feedback you're looking from your beta readers.
So let me do a quick recap, because yeah, we're having a tough. The internet is having a bad hair day. It's definitely a Monday.
Is there a phone number, Beth, I could call in maybe?
Oh, there's not. It is all online. We'll keep going. We'll keep trying. I think I just want to do a quick recap of the beta readers. So beta readers definitely, yeah. We always say it wouldn't be a live stream if something didn't go wrong. Really wasn't trying to invite catastrophe with that, but it seems I have. The beta readers represent your target market, your target audience. So the example that you just gave, if you have a YA novel that's targeted at YA young girls like 14 to 16, it'd be wonderful if you can have that group read your book. Now, those could be, friends of the family. They could be your nieces. They could be, without being creepy in today's world, there are lots of ways to find your ideal reader, but think about who they are. And the same does apply in software, because you want your target audience to give you that most valuable feedback, what they love about your story, what they don't love about your story, where they get lost, where they lose interest, how they emotionally connect or don't connect to the characters that you've built and the worlds that you've built. Giving that level of feedback really should come from your ideal target audience. Otherwise, you may miss the mark with your ideal target audience if you take those recommendations. Uh-oh. You there, Ally?
Yes, no, that's absolutely right.
Great.
That's absolutely right.
Great.
And I should be clear, I'm so sorry, all of you. I know that this is coming across.
Uh-oh.
So just to be clear, you're not giving it to your alpha readers and then immediately giving it to your beta readers.
Yes, there's a resting period. There's a revision period. The feedback that you get from your alpha readers. And Ally, would we give it to alpha readers at the end of the first draft, or when would alpha readers be most helpful?
When you have a complete first draft, that's the time where you
where you can engage those alpha readers. And
Could
some of
bring if you're
those,
working with a professional. Yeah,
I'm sorry, working with a professional who I am so, this is
it's okay.
technology versus.
Technology. If you're working with a professional freelance editor, this is also the same. So a freelance editor could also be considered an alpha
Reader, because they're looking at broad
or it's
structural.
finished. You want to save those. Yeah. You want to save those beta readers until the draft is really close to being finished. The beta readers should not be cleaning things up for you. The beta readers should be reading something that represents something pretty close to a final product so that you can get that real temperature test of, what are my reviewers on Amazon going to say?
Yes. So and I think Roland hit it right on the
target
head.
audience is going to respond to the book.
Exactly. Those alpha readers really being hopefully fellow writers or your freelance structural editor, looking at those broad arcs and giving you feedback on the structure, the tension, the drama, the character development. But beta readers, yes, members of the target audience. And there will be a big gap in between those times, because depending on the alpha reader feedback that you get, you may have to do some work around your story arcs, around the entire, phases of your story, making sure that you hit that climax at the right time and then take it back down a little bit, the rising action and falling action. So that level of feedback from your alpha readers may take a little bit of time. So having beta readers that you've identified in your target audience to give you feedback that is more emotional and more subjective, that, as Ally mentioned, will help you understand how your target audience is likely to react to your finished product. So it'll be very close to the finished work. So that takes us through. So we've gotten our first draft, and a quick reminder, my goodness, such a Monday. It's okay. So having your alpha readers ready and available and willing to give you that feedback, it will be a little bit emotional because this is your baby. It's at that first draft phase. And Ally mentioned, I just want to underscore, a lot of times we get questions of how do we know when we're done? So you can use a professional editor instead of alpha readers to get that structural feedback. The way you may know that it's ready to go to alpha readers is that you've read through, it feels cohesive, it hits your story arcs, it hits those major plot points, it has that tension, it flows logically and cohesively from start to finish. And you've got really three-dimensional characters that evoke some emotional response. That's how you know it's ready to go to an alpha reader. And yes, Stephen, you can totally use a professional editor as that. We absolutely, even at AutoCrit, we encourage people to use professional editors. We try to also give you ways to make it less costly, less time consuming, and so you can actually give a better product to that editor and help their job be a little bit easier and help gain your confidence as a writer. So Ally, it sounds like you're back.
I hope so. I really apologize, everybody.
No problem. We're gonna keep rolling. So we've talked alpha and beta.
Yeah.
We are done our first draft. We've talked through, okay, I've got my alpha reader feedback back. So in terms of editing and next steps, what's next? Making all the fixes that you think are appropriate from your alpha readers.
Yeah, so you've done the work based on feedback from your alpha readers. If you didn't mention it already, this is where AutoCrit comes in. So once you've put in, the feedback from other humans, the kinds of things that only humans can do, AutoCrit is an incredibly powerful and robust tool. But of course, it is still software, so there are some limitations. But once you've gotten that from your alpha readers, use AutoCrit. AutoCrit will help you to still further refine some of those big picture issues. And especially because you folks have introduced these awesome new tools that compare the books to published books in your genre, some of the best-selling books and authors in your genre. You can even get more perspectives. So for example, is your book twice as long as the typical book in your genre? That's something you want to know.
Yes.
The power words are, is the tone
one of my favorite
right? Absolutely. So like, if you haven't used AutoCrit yet, that is the point where it becomes really, really useful, because it's not going to tell you that your story doesn't make sense, but it is going to tell you how to make the writing better, how to avoid cliches, how to make sure that the rhythm and the pacing, at least from a word count perspective, looks right. So, so it can tell you, from one section to the next, if you've got paragraphs that are just running crazy long, or if your sentences are over long and your reader might stumble over that kind of thing. AutoCrit's going to be able to help you with all of that. So that's definitely what you would do next, before then taking it to beta readers to get that sort of final impression of how the book is holding up for the people who ultimately you hope will buy and read and review it.
Right? Oh, that's wonderful. So after beta reading, I'm going to do Happy Path. You send to beta readers who are directly in your target audience. You've done the work with AutoCrit. You've improved your flash reading ease score to about an 80. You've reduced your adverb count. You've switched up your sentence starters. All of these are reports in our AutoCrit Professional. Beta readers really like it. They're giving you a mix of both human feedback and around the emotional connection with the characters, the compelling nature of the story, the pacing, etc., that you can also kind of back up with AutoCrit. They're also going to maybe tell you, I noticed that you overused this phrase, so maybe you ignored that report in AutoCrit. And so, John, would it catch the "and" in the video title? Haha. No. Well, no, it wouldn't, because it's not a grammar checker. It is looking for word pattern usage. So if you're writing a horror and you compare to Stephen King, and he uses, how famous he is for saying the road to hell is paved with adverbs. He actually uses quite a lot of adverbs. So it would catch things like that. And then when you're talking about final polish, when would you send it to, if you have not used an editor in the early stages? When do you send to a pro editor? When do you go directly to publishing? And I want to talk a little bit about self-publishing as well. That has been such a popular option. How do you decide when to send to Kindle, for example? When you would go traditional? How does that whole thing work? I'm going to hand it to Ally and just listen in.
Yeah, so big questions, really big questions. So the first question I would say that an author really needs to ask himself or herself is whether or not this book is something that really meets professional standards. And that's a really big question, because you have so many options for how you can get content out. And deciding whether or not a book is ready can be a little tricky. But what's important to understand, and I meet a lot of new authors especially who do this, is they sort of feel like publishing is a bit of a pipeline. Write book, edit book, publish book, sell book. But the reality,
become a millionaire, buy an island. I just want to finish out that pipeline.
Absolutely. 100%. That is the end of the pipeline. Absolutely. So the problem with that understanding is that in reality, and many professional writers, will tell you this. First of all, not everything you write is destined to be published. Just like any craft, writing takes practice. If anybody out there is a crafter, if you like to knit, or if you like to cook, or if you do woodworking, right? Anyone who makes stuff, you guys will understand this. That first sweater that you ever tried to knit, right? The first time you ever tried to do a big fancy roast, the first time you tried to make a chair, whatever it is,
Oh, it's funny because it's true.
Because it's totally true. And writing is no different. Sometimes the first thing that you write, the first book you write, sometimes the first and second and third thing that you write may not be publishable. It may not be ready for publication now or ever. Sometimes it's a matter of skill level. You may have an incredibly intricate plot line for some mystery that's going to be amazing one day, but maybe your writing skill set just isn't there yet because you're just starting out. You're trying to tackle something that's very ambitious and you're just not there yet. So it doesn't mean you're throwing it out. It just means you're setting it aside, and then you'll come back to it later when your skills are a little bit more refined, right? When you can tackle that super fancy, knitting, drop, stitch, purl, whatever, right? Like, I'm not a knitter, you can tell. But, sometimes you have to come back and tackle that thing later. Sometimes what you've written, you guys, you will never publish. Sometimes you've written something for the sheer value of the practice of the writing, of pulling a story together. And that is totally okay. So if you're in that boat, pat yourself on the back, congratulate yourself for the work that you've done and the learning that you've done, and just set that puppy aside and move on to the next one. Not everything needs to get published. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing to understand. And the second thing to understand is that traditional publishing, to use yet another metaphor, I liken it to baseball, right? Major League Baseball. Trying to get a book published in traditional publishing is Major League Baseball. You don't roll out of bed one day and think, you know what? I really love watching baseball. I'm going to go try out for the Yankees.
No, it's so accurate. It's true, because that is, especially the Yankees, right? Massive,
historic franchise,
Historic. No better phrase has been uttered about them. They are an historic franchise. And the people who play for the Yankees, the guys that play for the Yankees, have been practicing and playing ball and doing the drills and putting in the work for years and years and years. Now, there may be that one lucky guy who is like so naturally gifted that they don't have to work at it. That's like winning the lottery, winning the genetic lottery. And while it's a lovely dream, I think you can have a dream, but you also have to work hard for your dream. If that's really what you want to achieve, put in that work, put in the practice stories that Ally mentioned. Take up writing challenges. Do those short stories from prompts. Do an exquisite corpse. Do whatever it takes to keep putting that work in. Because as Ally mentioned, and not everything you do is meant to be published, or not at that time. You may have a manuscript or a pile of raw material now that has goodness in the plot, goodness in the characters, goodness in the world building that you did. You can come back to that later when you've been able to enhance your craft and level up your skills and really do justice to that goodness. So when we talk about kind of shelving a manuscript, that's not always bad. And we just talked to an author this week who said, I'm going to go back and dust that off. The first works I did were horrible, but I think there's something there, and I'm going to go dust those off and go back to them. That was Jennifer S. Brown, author of Modern Girls, and that's just some phenomenal writing. So
absolutely true. And the media doesn't help us in this respect, because what does the media love to do? They like to tell the sensational stories. Mm-hmm. So they're going to tell you about the person who rolled out of bed and thought, I'll write a book today, and writes this book and it becomes a mega bestseller and their whole life has changed, because that's the exciting story. But that's not representative of how it works for most writers. And I think it's really important to understand that, not because it's depressing. And I understand, I get this feedback a lot. Well, you're just depressing people. You're just discouraging people. And I think, no, what's discouraging is hearing stories about these instant international phenomenons and thinking, well, I sent my story out and all I got was rejection letters, so I must suck. I can never be that person. It's an unrealistic example. You're not meant to be that person. There are hundreds of writers who are making a living writing books and connecting with readers and living the dream and are very, very happy that you've probably never heard of because they never were Stephen King, right?
Yeah.
They were never, Jodi Picoult. Like, it's not a story that is typical. The typical story is the practice and the coaching and the, working with others and playing and getting experience. That's what's really the typical story. That's really the model that you should be going after. And don't feel like you somehow are inherently terrible, or there's, you are never going to make it as a writer because you didn't see that instant success. I think that's the really destructive and discouraging thing, is to see that and think that that's what you should be doing, when in fact that's very rare.
Absolutely agree. Social media especially can give us such a skewed perception of reality because people are only sharing their best life. And if you see someone who published a book and that does really well, if you talk to them, chances are 99% of them have written dozens of manuscripts, hundreds of stories, years and years, that they write because they love it. And they write to connect with their characters and to share those experiences with other readers. It could just be their own family. And that's okay because they love it and they're living a joyful life because of that.
Yeah.
I want to really quickly, Carla has a terrific question. When we're talking about alpha readers, beta readers, letting other people see your work, before you get to that very final polished stage and send it to a publisher or self-publish, in today's world especially, we want to be incredibly sensitive. And so it introduces the concept of a sensitivity reader.
Yeah.
When would you incorporate a sensitivity reader? And I think the answer is it depends, but I want to hear Ally's perspective on sensitivity readers and how and when best to use them.
That's a great question. I'm so glad that came up. I think the idea of a sensitivity reader is still new to a lot of people, so I'm glad that we can mention it. So let's define it first. To be clear, a sensitivity reader is a kind of beta reader whose specific purpose is that hopefully they represent or somehow are well educated enough to be able to see the perspective of people in the book that are not your completely mainstream white Anglo-Saxon Christian, usually male character. So people of color, people who find themselves in different places on the gender spectrum, or even could simply be a person who's different from you. I think sensitivity reads are getting a broader application, even if you're a woman writing a story about a male protagonist, let's say, for example, right? It might be to your benefit to use a sensitivity reader to help you, spot those things that you don't really see. I mean, it's not the typical application. It's usually more for the, not white male characters, but it could be useful in that sense. So you want the sensitivity reader to come towards the end of the process about the same time that you're seeking beta reads. And it sort of, as you said, depends a little bit on the type of book. You might have beta readers read it first because they might clue you in to the need for a sensitivity reader. So if you're not sure, let your beta readers read it and see if anybody mentions anything. That might be a clue that you do need one. You could also have a sensitivity reader come in after your beta readers. If your beta readers are tackling things about the plot and the story in general, but you want that sensitivity reader to come in and make sure that you're not being offensive, that you are not writing anything through your own lens of privilege, and you're just blind to something you might be saying that's totally inauthentic for one of your characters, right? And you don't even know, because it's hard to know what you don't know. That's the whole point of a sensitivity reader.
Oh, that is a really valuable advice. And we talked about it a little bit. I was just reaching over to grab this book from my table, Death of a Bachelor by M.A. Hinkle. We interviewed her a couple of weeks ago. She's published by 9 Star Press, which is I'm going to say a niche publisher, but they really specialize in people who fall all over the gender identity spectrum, LGBTQ, queer authors with queer characters. And it is so different when you're writing for that audience, as that type of author, if you don't have that firsthand experience, if that isn't the life that you've led, it does not mean you cannot write it, but you really want to be respectful and accurate and emotionally engaging. And a sensitivity reader would give you that. I kind of err on, when I say it depends, how close are you to having that personal experience? And sometimes your sensitivity reader could be, if you aren't, say, for example, you're writing about a biracial marriage, an interracial marriage. If you're not in one, but your best friend is, maybe that is part of your sensitivity readership right there, to be able to tell you what they truly experience, and you have that level. And I would do that early on, because if there are parts of the developmental edit that need to be refined in a big way, like if you have structural changes that are going to have to happen, I would say get it in earlier. The further away you are from the topics that you're tackling, the earlier I would bring in a sensitivity.
I think that's wise.
Because you just, as Ally mentioned, you don't know what you don't know, but you can understand from your own personal experience, hey, I'm very far removed from the life experiences of a trans person, whatever. So I'm going to pull them in early. I'm going to pull them in, very, very early, because you just need that perspective.
Yeah. I would still say after the alpha readers, though, just because you need the story to essentially be in its final shape for them to be able to comment on it, right? So
if it's not even a story yet, if it's just a pile of words, should be like, tell me how I've addressed this very sensitive cultural issue, and they're like, this doesn't even make sense. I can't. So you're exactly right. After alpha, definitely make sure it's that cohesive flow, start to finish. but kind of maybe before even. In my experience, the farther away you are from the issue personally, pull those sensitivity readers in as early as you can after your story makes actual sense.
Yes, no, that you're absolutely right. Because in fact, if you are quite removed, the chances that you've missed something very important to that character's experience are higher. And absolutely, you don't want to end up having this book that everybody loves that you now have to rewrite a major element of because your sensitivity reader has told you that's not at all authentic, this character. I knew somebody once had a client, a gentleman author, who was writing a story about a female protagonist who had been raped. And, he had not been a rape survivor, and he was not a woman, and this was an experience quite far removed from his experience. And he was very serious about being sensitive and thoughtful, and it was something, he took it very seriously. But he did actually wait too long. He hired us. He came, for a professional edit. He did the backwards mix-up that I was warning you all about. He had lots of beta readers reading it before his alpha readers. So he had, done all this work and gotten all these people and gotten all these reads. And then it came into the professional editor, and I assigned him to, a woman editor, and she read it through, and she noticed it was a little bit about this woman's recovery and finding love again. But there were elements of that part of the process that were not at all authentic to what a true rape survivor's experience would be, and the kinds of challenges she would have to overcome in order to be comfortable in a love relationship again, having experienced that kind of thing. So, then he had to rethink
the major plot points.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
I giggled when we first started talking about this, because if you're writing from another gender's point of view, I'm certain everyone has seen it, but it cracks me up every time when you see these excerpts that are describing like the woman's body and how the woman is feeling about things and how her body reacts to romantic situations, and it's written by a man, and it is just the most outrageously inaccurate. So it just made me giggle, because some of them are really hilarious, and I'm certain they're satire, but it's well worth your time if you're addressing a sensitive topic to have a sensitivity reader.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for that question, Carla. Really, really good question.
Very much. I think we kind of skipped over the self-publishing thing. Do you want to
We
circle back
did,
to
but
that?
can we? That's
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we addressed that in the readership.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep, here we go.
So
Polished, ready to go.
if you've decided that for whatever reason traditional publishing is not for you, it takes too darn long, it's extremely stiff competition, you want to retain control, whatever the reasons, there are lots of reasons. And the good news is that independent publishing is a very viable option these days. And that was not always true. It took a long time to get to this point. And now you have lots of options, lots of services you can call on to help you create a great book, tools to market it, etc. It's still important to remember those things we talked about as far as traditional publishing, though, because ultimately, whether you become the publisher or someone else becomes the publisher, the end goal is still to sell a book to a reader.
Mm-hmm.
And readers still care how they spend their time and money. Now, it is absolutely true in some genres, especially, people can be more forgiving. So, for example, I know that there are writers out there who, I've met people who write like stream of consciousness erotica, do like a spell check and then publish. And they do these ebooks for 99 cents and they just churn them out and they have readers who love them, and that's fine. Most readers are not like that. Most readers would be pretty upset to spend their hard-earned money and their time on a book that doesn't make sense, or that starts to head in one direction and then goes in another, or that is riddled with typos and spell and grammatical errors. So you do want to think still seriously about whether or not the product you have is a professional product. And if it's not, just like a publisher would, it's up to you to invest your time, energy, and sometimes your funds to fill in those gaps and to get those services so that you can publish something that somebody would feel good about spending their time and their money on, and therefore hopefully result in a positive review or them recommending your book to a friend or something like that. So it should not be thought of as the backup plan necessarily, or the I don't feel like editing my book, so I'm just going to self-publish it. Like, you can do that. There's no law that says you can't. You can upload a file for free to the Kindle Direct platform and hit publish, and in 48 hours your book will be available for sale. But I cannot oversell how many times I have met writers who tell me, my book's been out for a year and I've got like no reviews and nobody's buying it, and please help me, and I don't know what's wrong. And I dig into it and I find out that what's wrong is they didn't do anything to make their book worth someone buying and reading.
Absolutely agree. And it can be a combination of a platform like AutoCrit, and by like AutoCrit, I mean actually AutoCrit, polishing, getting rid of some of those reader annoyances that as the author, and as the author then reading 50,000 plus of your own words, your brain can kind of skip over. So if you have used unique words and used them far more than you intended to, and perhaps even in close proximity, for example, then AutoCrit can help you find those. And it really brings in that level of fine polish and fine tuning of your word use and makes it very intentional. So having run the report in AutoCrit, you actually see each instance of, say, let's use adverbs. If you say softly 400 times and you're benchmarking against all of romance, or you're benchmarking against Nicholas Sparks, Jodi Picoult, and the recommendation is to remove 20 of those, walk through that manuscript, see every instance highlighted of the word softly, and make your decisions, because as the author, you're still in creative control, but it's helping you find things that will show up to your readers. We talk a lot about pulling your readers through the words, and things like repetitive use of unique words, or overuse of adverbs, or not switching up your sentence starters. Those are things that pull your reader out of the story and put them in the book where they're looking at the words and they're paying more attention to that. It's very distracting.
Absolutely.
So it also kind of gets to that the importance of presentation. And when you're talking about either making that final presentation, like giving your manuscript to a traditional publishing house or through your agent, or hitting that button and self-publishing on Kindle. And maybe you've had too many glasses of wine and you're just like, I'm publishing it now. I feel that's exactly what I envisioned when you said that. Just 48 hours later, you have a book. When you talk about like the presentation, what are some of the things that editors look out for, or that publishers more particularly look out for when they receive a manuscript? What does that presentation need to make sure that it looks like, feels like, includes? What are some of the major missteps there?
So one of the really early red flags can be word count. So word count.
Wow.
So understanding what's typical for your type of book, for your genre, and knowing how your book lines up with that. Especially if you're a new author, agents and publishers are very wary of taking on projects that are unusually short or unusually long. And unusually long is more common, but both can happen. So if, just as an example, your typical novel, mainstream commercial novel, is usually about 60 to 80,000 words. If you come in with a 200,000 word manuscript, you're going to have an extremely difficult time getting anyone to consider it. They're going to read that, they're going to read your cover letter and it's going to say 200,000 words, and they're going to say, nope, not even going to go there, because it's typically a red flag that the book is severely overwritten and that there's too much going in. Now, that's not always fair, and that's not always true. Sometimes a book's natural length really is long. We can all point to those door stoppers that we've loved and enjoyed, and
Brandon Sanderson, I'm looking at you, bro. Rhythm of War, like 400,000 words.
Yeah, every genre has them, and sometimes it's okay, but it's sometimes it's about what's trending. There were periods in the past where slower beginnings were okay. These days, if you have anything other than a literary novel and your opening is slow, that's also going to be a red flag. Agents and publishers are going to be like, this book doesn't start in the right place. It's not catching me in the first few pages, so I'm not going to read the rest. Easy cause for rejection. So understand what's typical, for your type of book, for your genre. Word count, the strength of the opening, the way that it opens, the things that happen in the opening. We talked earlier about like mystery thrillers, right? If somebody doesn't die, or there's no theft, or there's no mystery, there's nothing that happens, you've screwed up. You've already screwed up. And that agent and publisher knows that you screwed up. And if you're self-publishing, your reader knows that you screwed up, right? They're going to read that free sample on Amazon and they're going to say, what the hell is going on? I thought this was supposed to be a mystery. Like, nothing is happening. So those are some very typical things to watch out for sure. Basic grammar, spelling, punctuation. You're not going to get rejected because of one misplaced comma in an otherwise really excellent book. But if you have lots of errors, that's just amateur hour. Nobody wants to work with an author like that. So make sure whatever you're sending out is polished to the extent possible, for sure. And then beyond that, it all goes back to those ideas of understanding what your category is, understanding what your readers in that category expect, making sure that the big picture level is working. It's logical. There's a pattern of cause and effect. The climax happens in the right place, that you feel like you're building up to something, you're going somewhere. All of those things are in place. I've also met many writers who sort of misunderstand that there are different kinds of editing. And so they finish their book and they just go through and they correct the spelling and the grammar and the punctuation, and they deliver what's a very clean professional manuscript on that level. But there are big issues with the story. So you have to have both.
Yep. Big issues with the story in terms of overarching developmental edits. Big issues with the story in terms of word selection, word usage, patterns of word use inside there. Our old favorite, overuse of adverbs, really, really overused. So a lot of great information that happens during those editing phases. once you take your journey from ending, especially in these days, ending NaNoWriMo right around the corner. We're so excited to kind of finish with a big bang. Then rest a little bit. Rest your mind from writing on that particular manuscript. Just to do a quick recap of the process that Ally recommends. Take that rest. Step away from it. Give it its cooling off period. Let it marinate, whatever metaphor you need to use, but give it a little space. Feel free to write other short stories or whatever will keep you amused and keep your hands off that manuscript for a while. Next, do that full read through as if it isn't your own work, which can be very difficult, but it's worth it. And that's why it's so important to give it that rest, because your brain will come at it with kind of a fresh perspective if you give it a chance to distance itself, to forget about it, in essence, for a moment. Make notes in there, highlight the good, the bad, the ugly. Make sure that you're looking across plot points, ideas, confirm or decide on what genre you want to write or thought it was. Make sure you're still in there with the tone. Make an outline, which is, oh, it's so valuable. But for hardcore pantsers, I know this is very difficult, but give it a try. I think Ally even mentioned it doesn't have to be an exhaustive 42-page outline. Just sketch something down. Make sure your major plot aspects are there, your plot components. Maybe use the 3-act framework for that, or making sure you're taking a journey in that story and that it actually goes somewhere. The pieces connect. You're able to meet your readers' expectations, and that you're back again to the metaphor, that all your hands are connected to your arms, are connected to the body, and you don't have various pieces out there floating around that don't add value to the story or really make even sense with the story. So connecting all those pieces together. Take that first raw materials into your rough draft. Once it's cohesive and flows start to finish, then start your revisions in your first draft. The scene and character level, make sure everything is logical. As much as it should be. If you're in a fantasy, make sure it's logical to the reader. It may not be real life logical, which is absolutely fine.
Inherently logical.
Inherently logical. Yes, inherently logical. Thank you. I knew there was a phrase for that. That it's engaging to the reader, that you're meeting that emotional tone, that if you're trying to write a thriller, that you're not focusing too much on, that if you're trying to write a romance, that you're not focusing too much on fear and greed, but that you have a little encouragement in there as well. So looking at the power words for your emotional tone is one of my favorites. I just ran a manuscript through and it was all over the place. So I feel like I am well back into that raw materials phase. Engage your alpha readers, who again are people who will know some of the technicalities of writing. Ally mentioned a few great places to find alpha readers. Your writing groups, online writing groups even. Nano partners, maybe you palled around with someone and they even have a spot on nanowrimo.org to find buddies in there. And you'll get tactical, like there's no tension here, there's no conflict, there's no climax, or the climax happens in chapter 4 and it's a 40-chapter book. So they'll give you that really constructive structural feedback. Go to your beta readers, sensitivity readers if you need them, and then do your final polishing. If we want a woodworking example, not everything that you make when you're learning to woodwork will be furniture showroom ready. And to take that one a step further into the woodworking analysis, you go from your 80 grit sandpaper to your 240 grit as you get finer and finer. You're fixing those structural issues, you're fixing the character arcs, making those characters 3D, making them engaging and emotionally evocative. And then you're doing those touch-ups, the stripping out of adverbs, the changing up of your sentence starters. So a great recommended progression for editing, and AutoCrit supports that all the way through in terms of, get started with those big, structural issues, move on into the fine-tuning details as you go. And then you're ready. You're ready to publish. Fingers crossed. You've put in the work writing, you've put in the work editing, and you've most importantly had a really fun time along the way, because you should enjoy, well, not everyone's going to enjoy editing as much as we at AutoCrit do. So that's a bit of a stretch of the imagination.
You just got to embrace it. It's part of the process.
Embrace it. It is part of the creative process. It's part of the creative process. And what we have found through our own use of AutoCrit and through our clients' use as well is that as you use it, for example, to manage your use of adverbs, it makes you a stronger writer. So the next time you start a new project, or you go back to that project that had an amazing plot and your words just weren't quite there, you will skill up by using AutoCrit and then go back to that. And what you'll come out with will still be a pile of raw materials, but they will be so much better. That is such a fun aspect that we don't really talk about as a sales point of AutoCrit. But sorry, can you guys see the cat is sitting? Can you see
perfect.
her?
Just perfect.
Awesome. This has been just the best live stream ever. I'll just we'll just embrace this. But it'll make you a stronger writer, and that's part of that practice. So when Ally talks about practice, write, edit, and read are 3 of the best ways to get better at writing.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. The only way to get better is to keep writing.
Mm-hmm.
You have to. You can read about it all day, but if you're not actually writing, it's not going to change.
Well, Ally, thank you so much. This has been so wonderful, and clearly it is time for someone to have lunch. She's just letting me know. I know that we went over. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us. I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties that we experienced. Ally, thanks for hanging in there with us, and thank everyone for being here today. We will have the recording available. There may be parts you need to fast forward through because of the technical difficulties, but I really appreciate everyone being flexible and staying with us. And Ally, huge thanks. I know this was so fun for me. It really does help me think about what's next after next week when Nano comes to a close.
And it's almost here.
It sure is. Can't wait. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you. Ally, we appreciate you. And I appreciate you, kitten.
Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.
Thanks. Our pleasure, Ally.